supporter and has been a wonderful contributor to the Eucharistic Convention. He is an extraordinary priest. He's an author, but as part of his outstanding priestly life, he spent 25 years as a Marist missioner in Japan and became somewhat expert in the matters of that almost inscrutable society. And he is noted as a reconciler, bringing people together. And as in his notes, he mentioned his older brother, Tony, also a Marist priest, worked tirelessly for reconciliation between Australians and the Japanese, creating sister cities and bringing people together. And this weekend, in addition to talking about reconciliation and faith, Father Paul will share his insights on the canonization of Blessed John Paul II and Blessed John the 23rd, about whom that painting was made. They will be canonized in Rome tomorrow. So it's a great pleasure to introduce an old friend and a sincere supporter of the Eucharistic Convention, Father Paul Glynn of the Society of Mary.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't that a beautiful Mass we had? The Lord loves our laughter. He wants us to be joyful people. And certainly that Mass was a Mass that was full of love and full of joy. I've been hearing confessions. It's very impressive to hear people just opening up their heart completely to the Lord. They just want to be good people. And over this weekend now, the Divine Mercy Weekend, there'll be special graces for every one of us. So let's ask the Lord, let's talk to Him. I've told some of the people coming to confession to me, now go out and tell the Lord what you just told me and listen to what He advises you, because He certainly does advise us if we ask Him. A friend of mine worked in a parish where Bob Hope used to go to church. You'd all remember Bob Hope. He became his wife went regularly to Mass for years. Bob would often go with her, and finally, I think it was 10 years before he died, he asked to be received into the church. But he said, don't tell the newspapers. He didn't want a big note himself. And he actually lived well into his 99th year. And on one occasion, because the person speaking thought he was deaf, said, who would want to live to be 100? And he said, someone who's 99. He said, when I was a young entertainer, I would have starved to death, except for all the vegetables and fruit they threw at me on the stage. And I think it was Bob, wasn't it, who told that story about the old-timer. He was 110 years old. And the local journalist came to interview him, and the old-timer said, had I known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of my health. Well, Bob found the faith through the good example of his wife, and he gave us a lot of laughter. I'm going to talk to you today, first about a problem I had. In Australia, when Vatican II was going on, the Archbishop of Hobart, Gilly Young, put on a big liturgy conference. And they prepared for about 6 months, and they sent out questionnaires asking the people what helped them in the liturgy and what didn't help them. And quite a number of people said, sometimes we like to hear the priest talk about his problems and how he handled them. This is very much in touch with Vatican II. Until Vatican II, we used the word sermon. After Vatican II, we began to use the word homily. Like a sermon is like a school teacher up on high, yous down there, yous better do this. whereas a homily comes from the Latin words homos ille. Homos is the same, and ille is the group. And so a priest is one of the group, gets up and prays for some time and thinks, and then tries to share something that might be helpful to you. Well, we have a lot of atheists around today. Now, when I went to novitiate, it was up in a mountain area in New South Wales, and it was a beautiful, simple year. It was straight after the war. 4 of the novices out of 16 had been soldiers or airmen, or one was in the Navy. And there was a great sense of optimism in Australia. The war was over. Most of us had brothers in, we were worried about they might have been killed, and they'd all come back safely. And it was just a full-time, simple year with the Lord. A lot of prayer, a lot of silence, no newspapers, no radio. I think some of the ex-soldiers found it hard not to be able to smoke, but they put up with that. And then after the 1 year of novitiate, I went down to study philosophy. And we were told to think. And I started to think, and my thinking was getting me into some trouble. I began to have doubts about the faith. How do we know that the gospel stories are true? They happened 2,000 years ago. They're beautiful stories, but so is the Cinderella story beautiful, to cheer up children. And then my doubts about the faith came, about the church, and finally about God. See, after the war, there were a lot of articles about Auschwitz and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I began to have this problem. If God is all loving and all powerful, why does he allow this? Those innocent people being wiped out. So I ran into a very painful time in my life. I wanted to be a priest. My family was Catholic. We knew the Jesus story. It was very beautiful. It gives an answer to death, even an answer to suffering. But is it true? And this thought came to me. If I become a priest in 7 years' time, and I'm in a parish, and a young mother is killed in a road accident. She's left children behind, and she's left a grieving husband. And I say to him, but your wife was a good person, she's in heaven. And he says to me, Father, do you really believe that? Are you sure of that? Are you absolutely sure there is a heaven? That was the thought that came. And unless I could answer that question clearly, what was the point of becoming a priest? I'd be a false priest. And so, in my pain, I got a hold of some books on Lourdes. See, I was thinking like this: if I saw Jesus' miracles, I'd have no problem believing. He must be the Son of God. No one could do those miracles. But did those miracles happen? It's 2,000 years ago. And so, in a kind of desperation, I got about a dozen books on Lourdes, and I tried really hard to find a natural explanation, because it's no good believing if the evidence is not there in the state I was in. Now, reading these books and reading about Lourdes, I found it something that I thought was important. Benedict XIV, who died in 1758, they called him the Scholar Pope. And he set down the conditions for a miracle to be accepted, such as the miracle we had for Pope John Paul, or a miracle at Lourdes. The Lourdes doctors follow these 4 principles. They're rather simple. The first principle is it must be a physical disease that's cured. With a mental disease, you can't examine it. But with a physical disease, you can examine if it's tuberculosis. There are all the signs there, the lesions in the body. So it must be a physical disease that's attested to by competent doctors. That's the first condition. Now, number 2 is the big condition. it must be instantaneous, like Jesus' miracles. See, we all know of cases of cancer going into remission over a matter of weeks and months. But there are no cases of cancer being instantaneously healed. The third condition is the healing must be complete. If the person is much better but not completely healed, they don't examine it, and that doesn't fulfill the condition for a miracle. Now, I'm not saying that when we pray and we get a bit better, that it's not the Lord working, but for a miracle to present to the church as proof that Christ is in the Eucharist, or that Mary is working at Lord, there must be a physical sickness attested to by doctors, instantaneously healed and perfectly healed, all the sickness gone. And the fourth condition is that they must wait for some years. At Lord they usually wait between 5 and 10. And during that time, they're waiting to see if the sickness returns. And they go through all of the medical papers, the temperature charts and when the person got sick and how far the sickness increased. Now, unless those four conditions are fulfilled, the miracle is not accepted as a miracle that you can propose publicly as a proof that God is working. Well, I got through those books all right, and it was absolutely certain that those four conditions were fulfilled, but I had a new problem. Remember the Madame Curie who discovered radium up to the year 1901. Now, radium had been there all the time, but no one knew about it. Now, radium has healing properties. It's used for some medications. And this thought came to me, maybe at Lourdes there's something like radium that's never been discovered. But that's why people are healed. See, I was trying to be the devil's advocate. I was trying to find a totally convincing argument for Christ's presence. Very often, at the Eucharist, the person is healed. Sometimes when they're immersed in the water. And this new problem came. How do we know that just like before Madame Curie and her husband discovered radium, it had been there all the time but no one knew, how do we know there's not something in the air or the earth at Lourdes that caused these healings? Well, I soon found the answer to that. Many miracles happen away from Lourdes. Probably the most famous is Pierre de Rudder. Pierre de Rudder was a Belgian. He was working on a big aristocratic castle and estate. This aristocrat was a count. He had a castle and a lot of surrounding property. And Pierre de Rudder used to be the man in charge of looking after the property. And one day they cut down a tree. There were 3 of them. And when they were shifting it, the tree moved and crushed Pierre de Rudder's left leg. It cracked the two, there are 2 bones in the leg, the fibula and the tibia. And just below the knee on the left leg, there was this break. Now, unfortunately, they're out in the country and they didn't get a very good doctor. He thought he bound the bones and he wound it around with starched bandages. De Rudder was in a great deal of pain. He was a long way away from the doctor, and after 2 weeks the doctor came to see what the trouble was. And the trouble was the bones had knit. See, there are 4 bones. The tibia and the fibula, both ends of it. And the doctor got a terrible shock. Now, the Viscount thought a lot of Pierre de Rudder, and when the doctor told him the only solution now is amputation, the doctor got a top doctor from the city to come out and examine the legs. And the conclusion was the same. This specialist said, look, the ends of the bones, they use the word necrose, to die. The ends of the bones go black if they're separated like that. And once they're starting to go black, there's no way they'll join. And the specialist said, the leg must be amputated. So the Viscount said to Pierre, look, I'll pay for the cost. You don't have to worry about the cost. And Pierre de Rudder said, no, I want to be healed by Our Lady. If I can go to the replica shrine in Belgium of Lourdes, I have firm belief she will heal me so I can work for my family. And so would you give me the money for the train and bus fare for myself and my wife? And the Viscount said, no, I'm not going to waste money on superstition. So he just flatly refused. He let de Rudder live in the little cottage with his family, and he gave him a small stipend. Not enough money to get to Oosthakker was where this replica of the Lourdes shrine was. And so de Rudder was like this for 8 years. Now the wife had to change the bandages twice every day. They were separating pus, and he'd get around on his crutches. Now, the Viscount died, and his son came to take over the castle, and the son had a fiancée, and he had told the fiancée that you could get this man's foot and turn it right around. It was only held on by skin. There was no bone connection. And she didn't believe it, and so they got de Rudder to come to the castle, and he showed how, yes, the foot could be turned right round. And then the new Viscount, the son, was much more friendly. And so de Rudder said, would you give me the money to go on this long train trip and bus trip to get to Oosthakker? I want to pray in front of Our Lady, and I believe she can heal me. So the son did that. Now everyone tried to talk de Rudder out of going. So he was in a terrible mess. This pus was coming all the time, and it was hard work on his crutches. And of course, because he wasn't using the legs, the muscles were starting to atrophy. And two of his close friends tried very hard to talk him out of it. However, he said, no, I'm going. Now, on the way in the bus, the pus spilled out onto the floor, and the bus driver got upset and abused him. And so there were many people who saw de Rudder in this state. Well, he gets to the shrine, and he's sitting down on the chair, and there's this beautiful statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, and without thinking he gets up and walks over and kneels down. And his wife faints. He can't walk. He didn't have his crutches. And there was instantaneous healing. Now, the parish priest got many of the witnesses that had met and seen de Rudder over those 8 years, that the bones were completely separate. So the Viscount contacted this specialist, who said the only solution is an amputation. And the specialist said, it's impossible, it couldn't have happened. And the Viscount said, we'll come and see. And he told de Rudder that the specialist is coming, but he doesn't believe you are healed. So as the specialist is walking towards de Rudder's home, de Rudder's out there hoeing in the garden. And when he sees him, he starts to jump up and down. He says, does this convince you? Well, it did convince the specialist. The specialist had been brought up as a Catholic, but at university he became a freethinker. There are no miracles. You know, the Enlightenment teaches that only things that the human mind can understand are acceptable. Therefore, the Gospels are out. Miracles don't happen, they can't happen. So the effect on the specialist was so great that he wrote to a famous French writer, Zola, who was an unbeliever. And he told Zola that I'm a doctor, I was a free thinker, didn't believe in the supernatural, but I saw that leg 8 years ago, and there was no chance of those bones joining. See, it takes a lot of calcium to make new bones. Now, the distance between the two bones is about 2.5 centimetres. And there's not that much calcium in the body at any one time to join those two bones. And in the letter to Zola, he said, I've been a free thinker, I know you're an unbeliever, but for the first time in my life now, I have peace of heart. I've found happiness. And I'll be very happy to explain this miracle in full to you, Zola, if you're interested. Well, Zola wasn't interested. So, my final problem, maybe in Lourdes there's some sort of unknown chemical like radium that produces these miracles. Well, Lourdes was about 1,000 kilometres away from France, from Lourdes. Lourdes is on the bottom of France. And so that was my last objection, that maybe there's something in the water at Lourdes or in the earth at Lourdes. These kind of miracles don't happen without the context of prayer. Back in 1954, some of the old-timers present would remember the Marian year. And there were a lot of articles in papers about Lourdes because it was centred on Mary. And I think it really got up the nose of some English doctors because a group of them wrote to all of the hospitals and clinics in England asking whether they had any experience of these kind of miracles happening. And no one had one. So they're happening at places like Lourdes or Fatima. Now, many people pray and miracles happen. Small miracles, but very important to the people. But you can't use those publicly to argue for the faith. So, a couple of years ago, I got permission from my boss. I said, I almost lost the faith. And what saved me was the witness of miracles at Lourdes. Many young people no longer come to Mass. Many young people, it's not that they've got ill will, they don't believe. There's an atmosphere of unbelief in our society, isn't there? You know, on London buses now, you see these signs put up by atheists. God probably doesn't exist. So forget him and have a good time. Dawkins, this Oxford atheist, is attacking Christianity, attacking all belief. And so I said to my boss, could I have some time off to go and research personally these places where miracles are happening? And the boss gave me 3 months. Now, I first of all went to Ireland. I'd read this book about this woman dying of MS, multiple sclerosis, Marian Carroll. And she was going around Ireland and England, giving witness to her healing. So I went to meet her first. Now, she was born in 1950 in Ireland. MacDonald was her maiden name. She had to leave school at the age of 15 because the family were poor. The parents used to go to England to work to get money. And at the age of 20, she was waitressing, didn't have much of a job, and she had an inferiority complex, never having been to high school. But at a dance, she met Jimmy Carroll, this red-headed soldier who worked for the United Nations peacekeeping force. And she told me we fell madly in love. And in no time, they got married. Now, they had to scrape to get enough money to build a little house where they could live. And Jimmy went to Cyprus. He was on duty there in the United Nations Peacekeeping Corps. And she said, after the first child, Anthony, was born, strange things started to happen to her that had never happened before. She'd drop things, for instance. And she'd get these terrible headaches that she'd never had before. And sometimes she'd trip on the carpet. Now, she told one relative about what was happening, and this relative gave her a dressing down. Marion, you're thinking nothing but yourself. All mothers go for these. Get on with your work. Stop your whinging. Your husband's over there, overseas, and here you are whinging. Now, with her inferiority complex, she told me that she never told anyone else about these symptoms. Now, the second child was born, and she said she was frightened to carry it around. She'd put it on the bed and cuddle it, leaning over. Anyhow, Jimmy's father died. So Jimmy came back from Cyprus for the funeral. And at the funeral, Marion just collapsed and fell on the ground. Now they took her to the local hospital at Tullamore, and the doctor said, look, Jimmy, there's something very wrong here. When she opened her eyes, all the colours were mixed up. He said, you better go to a specialist immediately in Dublin. Now, this is in the 1570s and the 1970s, and they diagnosed multiple sclerosis. Now, it wasn't very common in those days. It wasn't talked about very much. And so Jimmy had the specialist write it on his hand so he could remember it. And when he came back, Mary knew he had what the doctor had to say, the result of the tests. She noticed him looking at his hand, and she grabbed the hand, and she knew multiple sclerosis all right. It was a kind of a death sentence to her. And she told me how over the next years, progressively she got worse. The neck muscles went. Unless she wore a surgical collar, she couldn't hold her head up. And then the throat muscles went. Like MS attacks the muscles, doesn't it? And she couldn't anymore have solid food. Everything had to be liquefied. She'd have it through a straw. She could no longer hold a cup of tea. And then she became doubly incontinent. And she said, MS had taken away all my dignity. Now, then the kidneys, the catheter is running pus and blood. So Dr. O'Mara, her doctor, said, Marion, we'll have to operate. I don't know what it is. I can't promise a result, but we'll have to operate. Now, it was 1989, and towards the end of August. The operation was to be in early September. Now, on the last Saturday in August, Jerry Glynn turned up. He was an ambulance driver. And he said to Jimmy, there's a healing mass for the sick up at Knock. Bishop O'Reilly is inviting all the sick to come. I have a free day and we have a spare ambulance. What about if I take Marion up? Great, said Jimmy. So he goes into the room now. Marion's speech was so difficult to decipher that Jerry Flynn didn't know exactly what she was saying, but Jimmy got the message. Marion said, look, I'm sick, I'm tired, I don't want to go anywhere, please leave me alone. And Jimmy said, love, you've been in this room for months and months. It's 3 years since you've even been able to get up and walk with your crutches. Jimmy's an ambulance man, he knows how to help the sick. You go with him. It'll do you good to get out in the fresh air, and it will be a lovely mass. So against a better judgment, she goes. Now, some years later, researching this story, I looked up some of the people. Judy Coyne was one of them. Judy Coyne was in charge at the clinic in Knock. Knock is the place in Ireland where Our Lady, the Holy Family appeared after the potato famine. And it was an apparition about the Mass. It was thanking the Irish people that through the famine, that kept the faith, that kept going to Mass. So now they have this shrine there and there's this clinic. Many sick people go there, so they're encouraged to bring a list of their symptoms. If they have a bad turn, the doctor then knows what to work on. So Marion said she got this symptom, and Judy Coyne said, I couldn't understand her talk. She was totally blind in one eye and barely saw out of the other. And because she was doubly incontinent, we had to change all of her underclothing. And Judy Coyne said she was a dying woman. I know a lot about dying people. Anyhow, they strapped her into the wheelchair because she had no muscular control, so she wouldn't fall out when they turned. And they got her into the church, and Bishop O'Reilly had said, bring the sick people up close to the altar. So they wheeled Marion up in her wheelchair, and she told me that I looked up at the statue of Our Lady, and I thought it was the most beautiful statue I'd ever seen. And this is what she said. I wrote down what she told me. I looked up and thought the statue was the most beautiful and friendly I'd ever seen. I knew I was dying, and my children needed a mother. Above all, I was sad for Jimmy. We'd been married 17 years, and most of that time he was burdened with a sick wife. I couldn't get my thoughts in order. I wanted to try to express them to another woman, another housewife, who would understand. So I looked up at Our Lady and I said, you're a mother too. You know how I feel about leaving Jimmy and the children. It wasn't a prayer, it wasn't a statement. It was just one woman chatting to another. I then prayed to Mary, asking her to look after Jimmy and the children and give them the grace to accept my death as the will of God. And then the Mass started. And at communion time, Bishop O'Reilly came down and gave all the sick communion first. And Marion said it was like an electric current that went through her. And everything changed. She waited till the end of Mass. Now, she couldn't get out of the wheelchair. She was all strapped in so she wouldn't fall out. And Noella, a friend of hers, had come up and greeted her, and she called Noella and she said, will you unstrap me? And Noella did, and she went back to the medical bureau. Now, Judy Coyne, the matron, said it was like a resurrection. That woman, an hour before, was a dying woman. And now here she was, she could speak normally. I tried her whether she could read. I said, try reading this, and she held up the Knock magazine and Mary said, oh, this is about the rosary. Oh, yes, she said, Jimmy and I, when we're really down, we say the rosary together. And she read it perfectly. Now, Judy Coyne agreed that she could go home sitting up in the ambulance. Now, when she got home, she rang up Dr. O'Mara. All through, Doctor, I've been cured, I'm walking. Good God, woman, get back into bed. He thought it was some just temporary euphoria. And so he came to see her. Now the catheter was no longer running pus and blood, and she spoke normally, she could read, and after 2 days the doctor agreed that she could get up. Now she went to thank Bishop O'Reilly, and he said, Marion, you received a great grace. Now go around and tell the people what happened when you received the Eucharist, because many people no longer believe in the Eucharist. You know, their marriage gets into strife. They don't come along to the parish church to talk to Jesus in the Eucharist about what they can do to save the marriage. They don't believe anymore. You go around and tell them. And so she goes around with Jimmy. Jimmy had left the army, by the way, to look after her when she could no longer walk. Anyhow, they go around and they will take money for the travel, but no other money. She's been to England, been to America, and she's a very simple woman. She wasn't well educated, only went up to the age of 15. But her simplicity adds to her testimony. You really know that this is a woman telling the truth. There's no guile in her eyes. So that was one of the miracles I went to investigate. Now, another one in Ireland that I'd read about was David Parks. Maybe he came to Australia giving his testimony, and he got a beautiful singing voice. Did he ever come to Auckland? Now, his story, I met he and his wife, and I'd read the book about them, but I got the whole story. David said, before I was 10, soccer became my religion. I gave up going to church. By the time he was 23, he was playing soccer at 103 kilograms, a big strapping fella. And he also had a dance band, because he had a good voice. There was a talent quest, and he took part and he won it. And they started to call him the Frankie Sinatra of Ireland. So he had this dance band, he did the singing. Now he was playing soccer for all Ireland. He played against Pelé and George Best and the best of them. And in 1971 he got these strange stomach pains. They tried him on steroids and the pains continued, so they operated. And they found he had Crohn's disease, called after Dr. Crohn, who gave the name to the disease. He discovered it and gave the symptoms. Now, with Crohn's disease, you can't hold food. You vomit it up or you get diarrhea. And he went right down to 53 kilograms because he just wasn't getting nourishment. And altogether, he had 7 operations. The last one was for 12 hours. Now, before the operation, the doctor said, I can't promise anything. There's a possibility that this operation might solve the problem, but I'm not sure. So it took the doctor 12 hours for the operation, but it was a failure. And so he came and told Anne. Anne features in this story. The husband gave away the faith. Their first child was born with a defect that would never be cured. And David wasn't going to Mass, and that's when he said, there's no God. If there was, I'd spit in his face for doing this to an innocent child. You're stupid if you go to Mass. But Anne kept it up. And she kept praying. And she told me, I didn't pray for healing. I just prayed that David would come back to the faith and receive the Eucharist before he died. Anyhow, when the doctor told Anne said, Doctor, I can't tell him. So the doctor said he's got 12, 15 months of life. Will you please tell him? And so the doctor told him, and David told me I cried for 24 hours. My whole life had turned to ash. I'd been a champion footballer playing for the All-Ireland team, I'd had a dance band, and now I had nothing. Now, they put on a benefit concert, the musicians in Dublin, at the Green Isle Hotel in Bigorra. They put on this benefit concert, all these musicians came along and played. Now, one musician who was a trumpeter had a wife, came from the north of Ireland, had been brought up without any belief whatsoever, and she was a journalist before she married the trumpeter, and he told her to go to Medjugorje to get a story, and she said, I'm not one bit interested, it's all superstition. And then he said, I don't care what you think, if you want to get this, keep your job, you go there, because so many people are going there, go and get the story. So she went. Heather Parsons was the name, very much against her will. And she saw the Lord there, she said. I really met the Lord. She didn't go into details of how he appeared to her, but she said, I had no doubt whatsoever he's real. And I went back to the north of Ireland and took instructions in the Catholic faith. And so she told me, when David Parkes came stumbling in to this Green Isle Hotel for the benefit concert, he looked like an old man. She remembered him playing soccer for All Ireland. And there he was, all bent up and stooped, half his normal weight. And she said, I felt such compassion. I walked up to his wife and gave her 2 free tickets to Medjugorje. She said, I was so grateful for meeting Jesus at Medjugorje that with a friend I set up a company in Ireland to get people without much money to Medjugorje cheaply. And so she stepped up to Anne and gave these 2 free tickets. Now, after the concert, Anne told David, and he said, we went to the Adriatic coast for our honeymoon. I'd love to go there once again before I die, but get this straight, Anne, I'm not interested in your Madonnas or Masses. Just get that straight. I'd like to go there. We'll see that countryside we saw on our honeymoon. So Father Rookie was leading this. Maybe Father Rookie's been to New Zealand, he's been to Australia. He's a great healing priest. But he was in charge of the pilgrimage that Heather Parsons had arranged. And when they arrived on the station, the airplane depot, he walked up and shot out his hand to David, who just ignored him. David wasn't going to shake the hands of a priest. And so the pilgrimage started, and it was pretty rough on Anne. The problems he had, he couldn't eat properly and he was getting sick and nauseous. Anyhow, one part of the story that David tells publicly himself, he told us in Australia. You know how you hear about how some people with cancer get angry with their family who are well? Like, it's a strange phenomenon that often occurs with sicknesses, apparently. And David, when he knew he was very sick and not getting better, he's no longer playing soccer, got angry with Anne, and twice he picked up with another woman and lived with her for a while. And each time Anne took David back with no recriminations. She said he's sick, he's not himself. Now, this is preying on David's mind, how Anne took him back twice. And so when she says to him, so he didn't want to go to Mass and so forth, when she says, look, there's Father Rookie over there giving blessings. Will you just please go over and ask for a blessing, David? It won't cost you anything. And he told me that he was thinking of betraying his wife twice, with adultery. And that's why he agreed. And he went over and Father Rookie said, what do you want me to pray for? And he blurted out, I've only got months to live. So Father Rookie said, hold this, and put a crucifix in his hand and prayed over him. And David collapsed. He was out for about a quarter of an hour. He didn't know what happened, but when he woke up, his first words were, who hit me? And this Irish senator, who was also a musician and knew David, said the Holy Spirit did David and he does a good job. Now, David goes back bewildered. He has a normal meal for the first time in months and months, and nothing happens. And the next morning he wakes up and he's got this sin on his heart that he betrayed his wife. And so he sneaks out of the room, and these are the days when priests used to sit on chairs around the countryside in Medjugorje hearing confessions, and he goes up and he said, I haven't been to a Catholic church since I was 10. I don't know any prayers, but I want to confess my sin. And so the priest heard him and told him it didn't matter about not knowing the prayers. Now he's met Jesus and he knows Mary is real too. And so David goes back to Ireland and he puts on a kilogram a week, eating normally. Now, the one sad part of the story is the doctor refused to testify. Sometimes it happens at Lourdes. The doctor is an unbeliever. He's not going to get mixed up with superstition. Now, David's doctor refused to give any testimony about David's sickness, which is sad. You might even think that maybe that's a sin against the Holy Spirit, just refusing to believe. Well, David was a singer, but he began to sing songs about Our Lady. He'd put out a number of CDs, and he put out one on Our Lady. And a group in America heard his story. There were about 15,000 at this big gathering, and they asked him would he come and tell his story. And he told them, including the part how he betrayed his wife twice, out of anger that he was dying and she was well. And then he sang. Now, the wife told me that his voice is much more beautiful now. There's a quality in it that wasn't there before. You know, he'd be singing all sorts of risque songs before at the nightclubs, but now there's something very pure. And he might come here one day. Maybe John Porteous might know about him. But see, here's another miracle. There's no Lord water involved. He didn't receive the Eucharist. Often at Lord, when they receive the Eucharist, the healing takes place, or in the water. And David just received the faith. He knew, that's why he went to confession, that this me wasn't me yesterday. I've been changed. You know, at Lourdes, I did 2 trips to Lourdes to get some of these stories. What impressed me was this: a doctor there, a doctor in the Lourdes Bureau, in the medical bureau, said, "The biggest miracle I see at Lourdes is this: a couple will come along with a Down syndrome baby, and they're all tense and uptight. God, you've got to heal this child." And they go home like this, peaceful. The baby wasn't healed, but they realised this is their mission from the Lord, to look after this little child who will be perfectly healed in heaven. He said that's the biggest miracle, the acceptance of the sickness. It's okay to be sick. Everyone's got to die sometime. And you know, I think that we all have troubles. You might have read that Pope Francis, this marvellous new Pope, said the Catholic Church should be like a field hospital, taking in wounded people from the battle. He said there are so many wounded people in our society. In Australia, recently they published a report that the way things are going, that 1 in 4 Australians will go down with a mental disease, many of them with depression. 1 in 4. In Australia now, more young people die from suicide than from traffic accidents. When I was a kid, I'd never heard of youth suicide. Like, our society's gone wrong, hasn't it? Many people are wounded, many marriages are breaking up. And I think that's marvellous what the Pope's saying. The church has got to be like a field hospital to help the wounded. And I found this in my life, that if you do what many of the people do when they go to Lourdes, they accept their sickness. It's okay to be sick. Remember, if you read the letter to the Colossians, Paul says in chapter 1, verse 24, "It gives me joy to suffer as I'm suffering now, to make up for what is lacking in the suffering of Christ for his body, the church." Christ suffered perfectly, but many people won't open up their hearts. And Paul is saying, my sickness now can help people, so I accept it. Paul was near execution. He was chained to a Roman soldier. He knew he'd be beheaded. Peter was not a Roman citizen, so they crucified Peter, but Roman citizens were never crucified. It was too brutal. But see, if we can bring our sicknesses, our problems, our worries. I say one of the biggest sadnesses in a priest's life is people will tell you about some of the young people who've gone wrong, who are desperately unhappy. And the sadness of a good Catholic couple who brought up those children with the faith, that's deeply painful for them. Or sometimes I'll go to a new church to say Mass, and a couple will come around the sacristy, "Father, would you say a Mass for our daughter, aged 24, she hung herself last Tuesday." This desperately sad society we're living in. Now, some people think you shouldn't suffer, so if you're suffering, there's something wrong. But Christians know that that's not right. Christians are told you've got to carry a cross, you get a wound from carrying a cross. Suffering is part of life. And if we try to flee from suffering, it gets worse. People therefore get on drugs to get temporary relief, but it's not permanent relief. And so I think one of the great messages of Our Lady at Lourdes, she asked Bernadette to pray for sinners, to offer sacrifice. The Divine Mercy is the same. Sister Faustina was asked to make sacrifices that people would come back to God, that alienated people would not die in that state. Just a little drop of gin to keep me going. So, there are two messages in the miracles at Lord. One is this proof. Remember in John's Gospel, Jesus said, if you don't believe my teaching, believe my works. John used the word works or sign for miracles. He didn't use the word miracles like the others did. Jesus said, if you don't believe my teaching, believe my miracles. And that's one of the great messages of places like Lord. People who really want to find the truth. But the other great message is, all of us spend time in the field hospital. All of us are wounded people. So you put the wounds, the 5 wounds of Jesus in the Paschal candle, don't you? And the priest incenses that. Our wounds can become beautiful. Paul's final sickness became beautiful. That's why he wrote it to the Colossians. I, with joy, offer my suffering as I'm suffering now for what is lacking in the suffering of Christ for his body, the church. And so, the more important happening at Lord is the peace that comes. I met an Irish lass married to a dairy farmer at Lord. She's a volunteer nurse. She became a nurse and married a dairy farmer, and her first child had failing kidneys, and the doctor said there's no hope. So she wouldn't let the doc operate. She took the baby to Lord, and the baby was healed. Now, she said, every year I come back and spend a month helping the sick. And she said the same thing. The peace that comes on people's faces, you can see it, who are not healed, but accept the healing, accept the situation, accept the sickness as part of God's providence for them. Jesus appeared after the resurrection. He could have wiped away those wounds, but he didn't, did he? He kept the wounds. Remember, he says, when he comes in on Sunday night, and it says the doors are locked for fear, and it's dark. And Jesus' first words weren't, Peter, where were you when I was being crucified? No, his first words were, Shalom, peace to you. That's the Jewish greeting. And then he showed his wounds, and then he said the greeting again. You don't say Shalom twice. If you say Shalom once, you said good morning or good evening. I think Jesus is teaching us that we will find our peace within our woundedness. We'll all be wounded. We'll all suffer and cry when our mother dies, husband or wife dies, or a child dies. Everyone suffers. Fulton Sheen said, I think the greatest waste in the world is not the waste of water or the waste of food. I think it's the waste of suffering. People flee from their suffering. They think suffering is evil. If they can accept it and offer it to the Lord with the wounds of Jesus. And so, just to end up now, we turn for a moment to Mary for a little prayer. Let's turn to her. Mary, you know we are living in a painful society. Many people are suffering. Many people have given up hope, especially young people on drugs, think of suicide. Please, Mary, help us to be people that spread the good news that Jesus is real, that Jesus is the Son of God who came to save us. And if we take all of our problems to him, we mightn't get physical healing, but we'll get that deep peace of heart that's so much more important than physical healing. Now let's together say the Hail Mary, asking Our Lady to help us respond to the field hospital of this world, that we've got to be people who spread good news and peace. And so we pray to Mary as we hope to pray when we're dying. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now, at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you, everyone. He was 110 years old, and the local journalist came to interview him, and the old-timer said, had I known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of my health. Well, Bob found the faith through the good example of his wife, and he gave us a lot of laughter. I'm going to talk to you today, first about a problem I had. In Australia, when Vatican II was going on, the Archbishop of Hobart, Gilly Young, put on a big liturgy conference. And they prepared for about 6 months, and they sent out questionnaires asking the people what helped them in the liturgy and what didn't help them. And quite a number of people said, sometimes we like to hear the priest talk about his problems and how he handled them. This is very much in touch with Vatican II. Until Vatican II, we used the word sermon. After Vatican II, we began to use the word homily. Like a sermon is like a school teacher up on high, yous down there, yous better do this. Whereas a homily comes from the Latin words homos ille. Homos is the same, and ille is the group. And so a priest is one of the group, gets up and prays for some time and thinks, and then tries to share something that might be helpful to you. Well, we have a lot of atheists around today. Now, when I went to novitiate, it was up in a mountain area in New South Wales, and it was a beautiful, simple year. It was straight after the war. 4 of the novices out of 16 had been soldiers or airmen, or one was in the Navy. And there was a great sense of optimism in Australia. The war was over. Most of us had brothers in we were worried about they might have been killed, and they'd all come back safely. And it was just a full
supporter and has been a wonderful contributor to the Eucharistic Convention. He is an extraordinary priest. He's an author, but as part of his outstanding priestly life, he spent 25 years as a Marist missioner in Japan and became somewhat expert in the matters of that almost inscrutable society. And he is noted as a reconciler, bringing people together. And as in his notes, he mentioned his older brother, Tony, also a Marist priest, worked tirelessly for reconciliation between Australians and the Japanese, creating sister cities and bringing people together. And this weekend, in addition to talking about reconciliation and faith, Father Paul will share his insights on the canonization of Blessed John Paul II and Blessed John the 23rd, about whom that painting was made. They will be canonized in Rome tomorrow. So it's a great pleasure to introduce an old friend and a sincere supporter of the Eucharistic Convention, Father Paul Glynn of the Society of Mary.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't that a beautiful Mass we had? The Lord loves our laughter. He wants us to be joyful people. And certainly that Mass was a Mass that was full of love and full of joy. I've been hearing confessions. It's very impressive to hear people just opening up their heart completely to the Lord. They just want to be good people. And over this weekend now, the Divine Mercy Weekend, there'll be special graces for every one of us. So let's ask the Lord, let's talk to Him. I've told some of the people coming to confession to me, now go out and tell the Lord what you just told me, and listen to what He advises you, because He certainly does advise us if we ask Him. A friend of mine worked in a parish where Bob Hope used to go to church. You'd all remember Bob Hope. He became his wife went regularly to Mass for years. Bob would often go with her, and finally, I think it was 10 years before he died, he asked to be received into the church. But he said, don't tell the newspapers. He didn't want a big note himself. And he actually lived well into his 99th year. And on one occasion, because the person speaking thought he was deaf, said, who would want to live to be 100? And he said, someone who's 99. He said, when I was a young entertainer, I would have starved to death, except for all the vegetables and fruit they threw at me on the stage. And I think it was Bob, wasn't it, who told that story about the old-timer